the presentation, that would be wonderful.
Rick.
Welcome. Again, welcome everyone. We're going to go ahead and start the deck. Welcome to Crestron. Welcome to MAV-203, Custom Design with UC in Mind. Our instructor today is Mr. Eric Roach. He is our lead technical trainer and develops all of our Unified Communication or UC courses. I'm your host, Richard Sasson, Global Director of Technical Services. With us today is Joachim Peters. He is our team leader and one of our advanced Flex support engineers based out of EMEA. Also with us today is Mr. Jason Molden, our Technical Director for Unified Communication Enterprise based in Chicago. He also has been one of my partners in crime in helping to create the Masters Technology Architect coursework. So thank you all of you for joining. We're glad to have you with us. I'm going to turn over the reins of the presentation to the charming and debonair Mr. Eric Roach. Eric, take it away, my good sir.
Thank you, Rich, and greetings, everyone, and welcome to MAV-203 Custom Design with UC in Mind. Again, here are the class guidelines just to remind you. We're not going to read this whole slide again, but these are indeed the guidelines. Let's get into the courseware right now. So our Flex product line, our unified collaboration product line, is designed to satisfy the UC need in a variety of workspaces in a typical commercial workplace, everything from private offices to conference rooms, open spaces to small meeting spaces. But today we are going to focus on the custom solution. And typically you need these custom solutions in spaces like auditoriums, larger spaces, theaters that can't be satisfied with a small room solution. Now we're going to focus on the main silos of our Flex products, specifically the platform silos of Flex. Now there are three main silos of Flex: Microsoft Teams, which also folds in Skype for Business, Zoom, and OpenUC. Today we are going to focus on the native solutions for Teams and Zoom. Again, the focus of the class today will be on custom space solutions. And let's start by looking at the anatomy of a Flex solution. When the Flex solution is running a platform like Teams or Zoom, you will always need a computer at the core. And then also you have a user interface, typically a touchscreen, to control the platform and audio and video peripherals. Now, in the Flex product line, that would be our C series in terms of custom integration. The C series is basically two parts: the UC bracket assembly, and that is the computer running Windows 10 Enterprise that natively runs either the Teams or the Zoom platform. And you also have the TSW 1060 touchscreen. Now, these are the connections, both HDMI and USB, going to the UC bracket assembly for content and for your peripherals. And you can see here that there's an HDMI in for content, of course, HDMI out going to a single or dual display, USB for audio, and the USB connection for cameras. Now, the relationship between the touchscreen and the UC bracket assembly, where the computer is through the LAN, and we typically recommend putting that on the same subnet. So while the connections are fairly straightforward, the integration process can be anything but. We see here what we like to call the wheel o' Flex. This illustrates that the various custom integration details that should be considered. We're going to unpack this diagram and explore each spoke in detail. We're going to start with the video spoke of our wheel of Flex and look at the custom considerations on the video side. We'll start with video output. And on the output side, it can either be a single or dual display. And in every case, you must include the EDID emulator. This is shipped with the product and is used to create a 1280 by 800 display output for TSW and Mercury panels to provide the user interface to control the platform. This EDID emulator should never be removed and it says so on the bottom after you remove it. So what happens if you happen to remove this EDID emulator? One of the things you'll notice, and it's hard not to notice, is that the user interface that you typically see on the TSW or Mercury touchscreen will also be shown on the displays. If you see that issue, somewhere the EDID emulator is not plugged into the UC engine and is laying around somewhere and should be reinserted back into the appropriate port. If you have video output issues, one of the things you want to look at here are extension devices that you may have used, and are you having an EDID or HDCP issue? We'll talk more about that shortly when we look at the input side. Now, on the input side, there's an HD conversion USB 200 device that converts HDMI to USB 3, and it's shipped as part of the UC bracket assembly. Now, there is one of these devices per platform that is whitelisted as content. So you cannot add more than one of these to a UC engine. Now, in terms of EDID and HDCP, the max resolution in a UC engine today is 1080p, and it does not support HDCP. Now, this can present a design issue if there's content, protected content you still need to display in the room aside, going around the Flex solution. So in general with Flex, it's advisable during the design stage to consider the device's role in the overall signal chain. Is the Flex going to be the endpoint? Is it going to be, is the switching going to happen after Flex? Part of the decisions you'll make there will be determined by your need to support HDCP content on the displays outside of the Flex signal chain. Now, I'd like to bring in a couple of my Flex experts, what we like to at Crestron call Flexperts, to provide some additional insight on this if they'd like to. Jason Molden and Joachim Peters. Guys, would you like to contribute anything to that discussion?
I want to go back, Eric, thanks, to one of the comments about the EDID emulator regarding support. So there's a couple different ways. You will get some different guidance in the provisioning phase about the use of the emulator. The idea is that, and we'll get to it in a second, but if there's a removal of the emulator for support purposes, you're intending to do that to project the touch panel interface up to a screen. If you're at a point where you don't have available connectivity or you don't want to type on a small screen. The other alternative there that I'd also recommend is the Crestron remote software, and that will also give you the ability to do that from your laptop instead of doing it. There are cases where it may make sense, but best practice is to always leave it connected and then use external tools to be able to manage, and Crestron remote will provide that option for you.
Excellent, thank you, Jason. And a great suggestion there to use the remote client instead of getting in the habit of unplugging that EDID monitor to put the admin page on a larger display. Great suggestion there. Another way to bring in input into these platforms is wirelessly. And both platforms, both Microsoft Teams and Zoom Rooms, support wireless ingest natively. So there's no external device that's necessary in those platforms. However, you can use an external wireless ingest device, but you have to look out for certain rules there. Most of these external wireless devices maintain their output sync, and that output sync needs to be disabled or the system will never go to sleep. So that is something to watch out for if you are using, something like Crestron Air Media, and there are ways to prepare Air Media for use in these platforms. We're going to move on, but before we move to audio, we do have a video polling question. Rich, are you ready to go with the polling question?
Yes, Eric, I am. Before we go over to audio, we do want to discuss what will occur if you remove the EDID reminder. So let me go ahead and launch that poll. We'll give everybody about 60 seconds or so to respond. Let's see what their answers are and see how they go. And then we'll share that poll with everybody afterwards. And there are a couple of interesting questions inside here discussing what about 4K support and USB 3.0 support. So Jason, maybe we could discuss that live real quick.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's take the first one, Rich. So from a platform standpoint, both Microsoft and Zoom are currently operating in a 1080p platform for both devices. We know that for both of the vendors that it's on the roadmap. We've talked specifically with Microsoft in the near term about a potential move to 4K. And remember what that's being predicated by. It's the idea of wanting to have more cameras on the screen and higher resolution of the individuals you're looking at. So for us, when we have the units, from a hardware standpoint, the units are 4K capable. We're simply not using that today. So everything that happens with the devices in or out is going to be in a 1080p format until the platform provider makes a change down the road. As far as the question on USB, Rich, we are currently operating in an environment, a bit of a mixed environment, that there is support for both 2.0 and 3.0 USB considerations. The 2.0 considerations are primarily going to be audio, and then potentially a certain range of cameras. I would say probably the more non-intelligent or more non-data driven cameras are going to be 2.0. If you take a product like the Hudley IQ, you're into a 3.0 realm there as well, because we're using video, plus we're also doing analytics. We're looking toward the future and thinking about what's next. The 3.1 spec is out there, but remember the bandwidth requirements effectively, we're going 3.0 to 3.1 are almost doubling. So infrastructure becomes a challenge at that point, and it's one of the things you'll have to consider with your designs. But 2.0 and 3.0 today, and then 3.1, you know, on the roadmap. I think the main takeaway there when you think about USB, we'll talk about a little bit later too in more depth. Focus on your infrastructure capability, because that's going to influence your design. We see a lot of people run directly at a USB 3.0 solution, when in reality is, or an extension solution, if you will. Maybe you want to look at the design first and determine if you actually need to facilitate that, or flipping the design helps you bring in higher bandwidth USB solutions.
Great, thank you, Jason. All right, let's wrap up the poll here, and we'll share the results with everybody. So, Eric, we can see the results here.
Indeed.
Right, what will occur if you remove the EDID minder?
And so there it is, folks. Camera and content will not be shown correctly, which is true because you're going to be seeing the touchscreen interface on the display instead of the display interface. And of course, touch panel UI, which is the biggest tell that this is happening, is going to be shown on the monitor. So 1 and 2 are correct. Either one you could have chosen, but of course we do have an option there for 1 and 2. 1 kind of follows 2. Because if the touchscreen display is on the main display, then nothing else could be shown.
Great. Okay.
All right. I'd like to also link into what Jason was saying about USB design. For those of you who might not be aware, Crestron does offer design help for you. It's our sales support services team. They can help you dial in these designs. They don't charge for that service typically. And their email is techsales@crestron.com. And so if you need that extra set of eyes looking at these type of connections and design, we do have resources at Crestron that can help you with that. Outstanding. Thank you, Rich, for the poll. So let's move on to audio considerations in custom design. First, we need to think about connectivity. Now, all audio connections on the Teams and Zoom Rooms platform are done via USB. There is no analog connectivity direct path to and from the UC engine when you're running these platforms. Now, we'll talk a little bit more about this in the next slide, but any USB audio peripheral you're using should be a certified device to ensure proper functionality. Again, we'll talk about that more momentarily. Audio typically requires a USB 2 connection, and these connections can be extended over a variety of solutions. Now, the USB relationship is very important, and if that relationship is disturbed, let's say in your design, you know, even though it's a custom design, maybe you still use Mercury as essentially your microphone and speaker. If that USB connection is disturbed, it can essentially disturb the function, the audio functions of your Mercury or whatever audio peripheral you're using. So if you do extend that connection, make sure it's a reliable type of extension. There are other, if you're using a third-party USB device like a DSP, that DSP should definitely be set up correctly, or people on the far end might not be able to hear near-end participants clearly, and that external DSP should be a certified device because of the way AEC is handled in these native applications. There is no manual way to disable native AEC inside of the application. The application is looking through USB at that third-party device to see if it's a whitelisted device. In that case, the application internally disables the AEC. Now, if you are going to use a non-whitelisted, a non-certified device, you technically can, but you're going to have to manually disable that device's AEC so that the two AEC platforms don't conflict with each other, both the internal AEC of the native solution and the external DSP AEC. I'd like to bring in our Flexperts at this point to provide additional background if they'd like, Jason and Joachim.
The Flexperts is going to get old quick, Eric. So just
okay.
I think there's an interesting dynamic that we need to remember. It isn't a case from a manufacturing level that as an MTR, as a Microsoft Teams room platform manufacturer, we don't have any particular preference from the DSP standpoint. We go with the certified solutions from Microsoft. So I take a lot of heat on social media, talk to a lot of customers, and it's important to remember that these products go through a very stringent certification process with Microsoft to be vetted. The 3 products right now that are on their list, and when you get to the end of the deck today and you take this later, we've linked the Zoom certified device list and the Teams certified device list, so you have that there and you can reference in terms of who's certified. So today you have Shure, you have Biamp, and you have Bose are the 3 certified DSPs. We know others are in process with Microsoft, but to be perfectly honest with you, we only go with what the here and now is. From a manufacturing standpoint, we've worked through that process with our products, and there's no guarantee that a product will get rubber stamped. They actually employ a couple different solutions to be able to certify Teams specifically. There's an acoustic component, if you will, where you're benching the product and you're testing it. And then they also employ what's referred to as dog fooding, where a company will take the product and use it in their own environment. And so they take feedback from both. So we only focus on the here and now with those solutions. The other dynamic to remember is we now have a third party in the mix. So you have your device, the Teams peripheral in terms of the MTR, and then you have your DSP. Well, there's another party in the mix that we sometimes forget about, and it's the cloud. Any of these solutions, as they communicate back and forth, there's the handshake happens locally between the devices, but all the information about what peripheral is being used is being reported back and forth. So it's not heavily enforced, but the one thing you have to remember is that's always going to be a component of these solutions. So plan for the solution that can be supported for the sake of your customer. Don't necessarily try to, oh, I like this DSP better, I'm going to use that. I fully appreciate it. Spent a lot of time from the audio standpoint. Have a lot of great friends in this industry, heavily focused on audio. It doesn't matter. It all depends on the certification. So to Eric's point, don't put yourself in a bad spot, because on the backside for Crestron, we have to say, are you using a certified product? If you're not, then you know what the response will be is you'll need to unplug or replace that particular solution with a certified solution so we can proceed. Keep in mind, Microsoft on their end also has the same requirement. If you have a ticket open with Microsoft and they have the logs indicating you're using a non-certified device, the first response is replace it, and then let's talk about what the challenges are that you're having. So just some context, I think it's important. It's not a decision to use one or the other. We go to the reference list and we pick something off the reference list because we can guarantee that that solution will work for the customer. So if that helps, Eric, with the context on why that certification component is so critical in these applications, right, that you adhere to those rules.
Jason, thank you. That's awesome information. And again, it's far easier to fix a design and dial it in on paper than waiting until the design goes in and then you're scrambling to make these changes in real time once the product is out there. So we can support you and help you dial these designs in here at Crestron. Moving on to the microphone. Again, speaking of certification, microphones are typically certified as part of the overall solution. Whatever device is touching the Microsoft Teams room is key. Ceiling microphone arrays typically connect through a certified DSP. Again, we just discussed that. And you want to select the right size microphone for the application. Always go conservative with your microphone specifications. Usually, I can tell you a true story. I was a long time ago working on Wall Street, and in a conference room, they had all Omni mic capsules around the conference table. And they were wondering why they were having all kinds of performance issues on conference calls. And when I went around the room, I saw that they were all Omni. So it's a good example of needing to select the right type of mic for the application. We're going to move now into another poll question, Rich.
Great. I think that's a wonderful idea. We're going to go to our next question, which is, what could happen if you choose a non-certified DSP design? I know lots of people are, lots of people are asking questions about where is the certified list. We will put that in the question and answers. I'll be adding that shortly to the folks because it's a Microsoft certified list. So we'll include the links in the chat and we'll add that on the presentation as well. There was a question as to what MTR stands for. Microsoft Teams Rooms is what my MTR stands for. So just so that was in there. And so, yeah, there is a list of certified products, not just DSPs, but overall certified products on these on the links that I will include in the answers. So having said all of that, we'll let this run for another few seconds. What are the fun questions do we see in the list here that we wanted to answer for everybody?
So as we look at these results, I think most people have the right idea in terms of what's going to happen if you use a non-certified DSP, right? You may have some performance issues. And again, we talked about the first aspect there, that AEC handoff may not occur correctly. Again, there is no manual way to turn off the internal AEC in these native solutions. It is all done through the USB recognition of a certified device, and then that AEC is disabled internally when that certified device is recognized.
Great. So why don't we go ahead and end our polling here, and let's see what the answer is. So Eric, as you can see,
it's all of the above.
It's all of the above. Most people got that, which is fantastic.
Yes.
Okay, great.
I imagine we have quite a few experienced people out there.
I would hope so. Absolutely.
How it all goes together. That is great. So let's move on to the user interface spoke of our Wheel of Flex custom considerations. Now, in terms of customizing the user interface, you can do some customization on the displays at the front of the room. Both Teams and Zoom rooms support this. However, the configuration of that customization is done differently for both platforms. It's a local image on the Microsoft side, and it is loaded to an admin porthole on the Zoom room side. Now, in terms of the user interface, and we're going to dig in a little bit on this one. This is pretty interesting. There is in both platforms a way to, both platforms have allowed us to have a single page flip out of the native interface into what can be a custom interface for custom room control. Now it's done slightly differently on both platforms. In the Teams side, you can see here on the slide down on their lower right, there's an icon that looks like 3 faders. That is the page flip to the potentially custom program page. Now this, per Microsoft, is page flip back to the main interface, as you see here, in 60 seconds if there's no activity on the custom UI, on the custom page flip UI. There is no way even in custom programming, to maintain that custom page. It, per Microsoft, will automatically flip back to the main interface for the platform if there's no activity in 60 seconds. Similarly, Zoom Rooms offers a similar type of page flip. However, on the Zoom side, there is no timed return. That page can be held. Jason or Joachim, would you care to add anything to this?
Sure. Which part, Eric?
Potentially the Zoom. The Crestron training got shut down because of the coronavirus before we did a lot of hardware Zoom training.
Yeah, let me just give you a little contrast between the two for reference, right? The Microsoft concept for wanting to remain in the native interface is to protect against cases in which someone leaves the room and a new user comes into the room and may or may not find the system on the resting page, the Microsoft page. And so that's the reason for the enforcement of the timeout in that case. The Zoom architecture is a little bit different in terms of what we're doing today with the product. And we're actually going from the standpoint of exiting the app and moving to the different app. And so at that point, the two aren't linked together, whereas in the Microsoft realm, our custom pages are actually sitting behind that application. You're just bringing them up front, controlling the order right at that point. So the main thing, the reason we point this out, and you get this for Eric's presentation, is we want to not necessarily contrast the solutions, but because we know that many of you are going to be working on the solution based on what the customer is asking you to do, we want to give you visibility on the way both of them work so you can best architect your solution under the constraints of either platform in that case. So they are slightly different, but having the knowledge of what they do should hopefully help you and help you guide your design decisions.
Outstanding. Thank you, Jason.
We'll talk about another Zoom option down the road when we get into a control section as well. Some of you are probably asking that question. There's another piece to that conversation we'll review later.
So there is a connectivity between the user interface and the UC engine running the native platform. On the team side, the UI device pairs with the UC engine over the network. And as I said earlier, it should be, meaning the user interface and the UC engine should be located on the same subnet. The Zoom solution is a similar kind of network relationship between the UI and the engine. But that relationship is paired in the Zoom cloud. Now for Teams, and this is only for Teams, we are going to be offering a direct connect option. And this direct connect option uses what you see in the slide here, this little USB to Ethernet adapter. It is a specific one. And what happens is, the network interface card on the UC engine will auto-configure a local link address for the TSW panel or Mercury when it discovers this particular USB to Ethernet adapter plugged into the UC engine. And it will provide a 169.254.0.1 address, and the TSW panel or Mercury will search for that address when the device realizes it's in local link mode. So basically what this little device does is allows a direct connection without needing external network hardware going from your UI, whether it's a TSW panel or Mercury, to the UC engine, which really simplifies configuration. Now, I believe you could also purchase this element, this USB to Ethernet adapter separately and retrofit existing systems to do this type of functionality. Is that correct? Jason and Joachim, I believe this can be, an older system can be updated to use this direct connect device.
Correct, right. If you have a retro or an existing installation, Eric, it is possible you can source the adapter in the slide there. You actually call out the specific part number. That's a product that's available on the website. The dependency there is making sure that your devices are on the current versions of interface firmware. So we're talking about Mercury, we're talking about TSW being on the latest. Under the hood, you also need to make sure that your Crestron application running on your device, whether it be Teams or Zoom, in this case, this is a Teams function, not a Zoom function.
Right now.
Based on architecture, right? But you're going to need to make sure your application on the team side is running the latest build. We've been pushing the compatible build from Windows Update down for about 3 weeks now. So the majority of the systems out there should have that, but that'll be one of the things you want to look for if you do need to retrofit an application, Eric. You need to get the adapter, but then also do your double check. But one other thing I might mention from a configuration standpoint to be aware of in this solution, we have a guide for this as well that you can get on our website. If you have an existing system, you will need to perform a restore on your user interface device, Mercury or TSW, prior to making the flip and moving from connection over the network.
Because that clears the Ethernet stack and the addressing to refresh it for the device.
If we really get deep with it for a second, Eric, what it actually does at that point, once the device has been restored, then we're taking the machine credentials out of the mix. So in a direct connect environment, we are no longer using the admin credentials for the compute device. We're connecting, and because it's local, we don't have to go through that. So what you're doing when you do the restore, you're actually wiping out the credentials out of your interface so it doesn't try to reconnect, because once you've entered credentials into the device, admin SFB is the default or whatever it might be.
Right.
And at that point, you don't have a way to clear those out. It's always going to want an entry, because once you put credentials in, it's going to expect that you need something.
Makes a lot of sense there.
Build standpoint, right? So just keep those in mind. Like I said, our support team has a lot of details about that, but we will start including this in the kits going forward. But if you do have an application where you're having challenges with the customer network, or you're looking at a case where, think of what's happening in the world today. We're thinking carts and we're thinking of the solutions. You may need a single drop. So in that case, you need to remove the necessity for the second user interface device to have a link. You can switch to direct connect in that case.
Right, and again, that restore suggestion is huge, because again, if you're retrofitting a previously configured system, you are going to have to do that, or it won't grab that address. And it'll still be looking for a login credential. Outstanding info there. Thank you, sir. So we're going to move on now to the control spoke, but first we have another poll question. Rich?
We do, Eric. Let's go ahead and launch the poll. What should I do if I see a connection error on my Teams interface, either TSW or Mercury? It is a multiple choice question. And let's see what the teams respond. In the meantime, while we're going through the poll, there are lots of questions going on in the background here. And I want to thank a couple of people who, one of the folks sent in a question, noting that while a non-certified device may possibly work one day, may work today, one day in the future, a Teams update could cause it to fail later if it was not a previously certified device. So that was a great note. Also, Microsoft does go ahead and modify the list if things lose certification. They do tell us. People are asking, is the Avia 1283 on the list? I want to let everyone know the 1283 is going end of life and has a limited time and limited availability. So we do recommend utilizing other DSPs moving forward, and the list is available on that link I've been sending out in the question and answers. Okay. And then there have been lots of other questions going on that we will be answering throughout. I want to turn it back over. We're going to wrap up the poll now and let Mr. Roach continue on. So I'm going to go ahead and end the poll.
Okay.
And here are the results.
There are the results. And again, we certainly have, and I would expect nothing less from a master's class. That is the correct answer. All of the above. You know, all of those options should be checked. You know, typically it's either a credentials issue of some kind or a network issue that the UI can't find or get to the UC engine. So great job on the poll, everyone. We're going to move now into the control element of custom considerations here. Let me enable my slide to advance. There we go. It's a little bit of a delay there. Okay, so let's start with probably the most popular area where we get questions about control, and that is display control. Now, the native solutions, both Zoom Rooms and Teams, do not include display control is part of the onboard specification. On the team side, the suggestion basically is, without any kind of external control, to use a display that can, go to sleep when it doesn't sense sync and wake up when it does. On the Zoom room side, it dims the display. It dims its own output when not in use. Now, if the system requires power on off, you will need some sort of an external control device. We definitely have different flavors, everything from, integrated control systems to do it, to options like DM Lite. And there are DM Lite receivers that don't need a control system to send, for example, 232 control to a display or CEC. You don't necessarily have to go down the custom programming road to get that kind of display control. With some of our products, you can upload control strings through a web interface, and that's pretty cool. Moving on to the UI side and the custom control options in the UI, this is pretty interesting, and so we'll look at this. In the Microsoft Teams room side, you essentially have 4 options. There's option A, which is no control at all. Option B, by the way, you get 2 custom controls, as we mentioned earlier, through that page flip, which is that yellow circled icon there. So option A is no control, but you can still put some text, as you see here. So while there's no custom control, there's still an element here that you can use, for example, for a help message. Microsoft Teams does provide reserved joins for UVA or UVC camera control. You can prepare an air media for use in the Teams solution, and we have instructions and online help about how to do that. And then there's the full custom solution on that page flip where you can do, room control and custom control. So those are your options on the Teams side. And on the Zoom side, you have a page flip option similar to Teams. And then, of course, you have option B, your embedded controls. I will open that up for additional details from Jason and Joachim if they'd like to comment on this aspect.
Yeah, I think this is probably one of the more detailed slides, and we did this on purpose to give you an idea of the depth in terms of how you can approach these solutions. Eric, will you do me a favor? Let's just walk back through this one more time because I think it's appropriate.
Yeah,
and I want to take it through the. Yeah, no worries. I think it's helpful. Right, so when we think about, let's talk about the Teams side first. Any ability, obviously, to leave the Teams interface in this case is done via the page flip button, right? So as we go through this, go ahead and click the first one, Eric. One of the things we're finding with customers is they have some rooms that are custom and they have some rooms that don't require any custom interface, but they want the icon to be there in all cases. So we've seen an approach with customers to use that page flip as a help page, call this number for support, things like that. The recognition of the button showing up on the panel is the inclusion of a graphical project. It is not predicated on the need for a control system. So keep that in mind. What makes that appear is the custom project being loaded into the engine at the point. Okay, so go ahead to the first one, Eric. Right, so we have the first one, obviously, which is a no control option. So you can still use the flip if you need that consistency. We see other people too, they'll make their first page their support page, and they'll have a button at the bottom that says additional controls. And so they can better manage the consistency of interface throughout their rooms. So go ahead to the second one, Eric. The option B, right? So we do have the ability to provide some camera control through the engine itself. So think of it in a loop back format almost. We're taking those reserve joins and we're taking the panel and we're sending it back through the engine and then out to the camera. Important to note that not all cameras will respond. So there is a little bit of a delineation there we have to go through from a camera standpoint. I'm actually working, Eric and I are working with support. We're going to work on putting together a list. By no means will it be exhaustive or include everything, but we're working to get a list of cameras that we brought in-house that we know respond to those command formats. So go ahead to the next one, Eric. The air media conversations is slightly different, and I would ask you to take a couple different approaches. We're talking about, we say air media, we think wireless presentation, but in this case, it's almost a miniature control system. It's not programmable, but it's configurable. And so what you may end up doing in this case is you may end up having the air media, and that handles gating of HDMI wired content coming into your system, and you're using the Air Media to be able to have those controls. Remember as well, we added Miracast support to the Air Media. So if you have a customer, Miracast is available on the Surface Hub. It is not available in the Microsoft Teams room today. So if you need consistency, you can bring Miracast in through your Air Media device. And so we have that one-to-one connection with the engine to the Air Media. And then the last one is the one that's pretty easy to follow, which is the full control system. And that's what we've been talking about since the beginning, is the ability to have your Flex system integrate with your control system in a regular capacity. Okay, so flipping to the other side, Zoom gives us slightly different a couple different options there that we have. So in the case of Zoom, we do have the ability to move between the applications. And so we can press the home button on the TSW screen, and that'll move us from our Zoom interface native out to the custom interface, and we can go back and forth that way. Option B there, Eric, if you can bring that slide back in, is relatively new. It's a new function that Zoom has, and it's called Room Controls or Room Controls API. Important to note, it is not the same thing as the full Zoom Room API that they have. This is a light version, if you will. What it allows you to do is to take a JSON file, load it to your Zoom portal, and then your Zoom engine, if you will have the ability to trigger commands externally, more on a one-way basis. And now I can include other text. So as soon as I load that file, the button you'll see there where it says Room Controls will pop up on the screen. And when you press that, Eric, let's go to the next one. And so what you see there is a simple representation of a simple touch panel, and that's built on that JSON file you have customization for. On the other end, on the Crestron side, our control system just has a client connection, or we're a server connection accepting the client inbound. So then we can use that, and now we can move data back and forth. So it gives you a nice way to augment the systems. But again, the main thing is from my standpoint, Eric's standpoint, we want to make sure you know all the options you have on the table, and then you can figure out what the best one is, number one, for your design, based on the team you have, and then based on what your customer needs are. So hopefully that gives you a little more depth on the variation of solutions we're offering there.
Outstanding, Jason. Thank you. And if you are doing Air Media with Teams, there's additional details and online help about how to configure that. It is called Flex Mode. If you go to online help and look for Flex Mode, you will find more information about that. Moving on to integration. Now, once a control system is introduced, as you Masters level folks know, the ecosystem definitely grow to fit additional requirements. But as Jason mentioned last week in the previous presentation, it's about behavior first, technology second, right? The technology should be kind of almost transparent to the end user in a good design and implementation of a custom solution. So both platforms defend the interface and give us a certain amount of leeway, allowable deviation from the native experience. So when you are doing custom UI work and custom programming in general for a UC solution, you want to reinforce the native simplicity of the native solution. You don't want the custom controls to get in the way, in other words, of the native controls for that solution. And we have another poll question, Rich, before we move on to cameras.
Great, Eric, thank you. Let's go ahead and launch the poll. Can I control the Flex system through custom programming? So let's see what they talk about that. In the meantime, we have lots and lots of questions that we're trying to get to, and we will be answering them as we go. Couple of things they have asked that we slow down a little bit as we're speaking incredibly fast. We are going with a lot of information to everyone as quickly as possible. There are a lot of questions about USB adapters, how that all plays in, the USB eNet, can that be used? So I think that's something we might want to revisit and discuss a little bit as we have, if time allows, at the end. And or we will answer those in the Q&As if we do not have time in the end. There are questions here. Can we use custom control with a regular Mercury system? Is one of the questions here that's asked. It's actually a really good question. Can I do custom control on a Mercury system? I know we discussed on earlier MTA sessions, can we do AV framework control with Mercury. That's in there today and that's supported. Do we want to discuss the concept of Mercury a little bit in depth so they can understand what can be done with a Mercury versus a Flex system and how that would work?
We'll definitely have that discussion at the end of this poll about control capabilities here. But
Great. So I'm going to go ahead and end the poll right now and we can discuss it right there. It's perfect tie into that question.
All right. In terms of application control from custom programming, the answer is no. There are some extenders for a limited amount of hardware control, but in terms of platform specific control, as of today, it's not available. Jason and Joachim, would you like to speak to that as well?
Sure. So the thing to keep in mind as we move forward on the variations, Crestron's been a partner with Microsoft on the Room solutions. Now this is the 4th gen product that we're working through. When we moved to the 4th gen, one of the things that Microsoft looked to do is get their arms around the solution a little bit. So some of the considerations that we had open in the previous product, specifically like RL2, some of those APIs and some of the background has changed. It's still a very active dialogue with Microsoft and having that conversation. How can we get details? The other thing that's happening in parallel that I'm sure as an industry most of us are aware of is the rise of Microsoft Graph, which is their API functionality. So we're exploring some graph options as well. So the main thing to remember today when you design your systems is there's effectively a firewall between the applications. The call data, the ability to place a call, all of those functions are held solely in the native interface, and then peripheral data, and our custom controls are held separately. It's still something that Crestron's very aware of, that there was a significant use of that type of technology, especially with RL2 products. We continue to talk to Microsoft about it, but we're communicating with them, but also looking at what Graph may offer at some point. You may find yourself going down the same road as well. So just keep in mind for your designs now, there's a separation between the two, application versus external controls.
Outstanding, Jason. That's huge info. Thank you so much. So we're going to move into, I believe, what's the final spoke in our wheel of flex design considerations, and that's the camera. And there are a few considerations here, and the Prezzo is catching up to my press. There's physical connectivity. Now, as we saw earlier in the presentation, and I will try to slow down here. I do get so excited because I'm very passionate about these solutions. In terms of physical connectivity for cameras, USB is the only format for camera connections. Native USB cameras plug directly into the UC engine. Now, if you have a non-native camera solution, typically that would be an HDMI solution. You can still connect to the USB engine through an HD conversion box, the USB 100. I believe Jason actually has one of these if he wants to hold it up and show everybody.
It won't show up on my video, Eric, because
the background will wash it out. But
it's on our website as well.
It's a small device, not super expensive or anything like that, but you can use that to bring in, maybe you have a DVR or some sort of multiple camera solution that you need to bring in via HDMI. That product will do it for you. Now, in terms of extending the camera connections, cameras may use USB 2 or 3 based on the feature set of the camera. Some cameras actually are even above USB 3. And so if you're taking a camera like that that's native to USB 3 and putting it through perhaps a USB extender that's USB 2, there may be some factors there that you may need to consider. The camera may not work to spec in that case. It may still work, but maybe the resolution is dropped down. There could be some other factors there. You always want to consider bandwidth when you're using, especially USB cameras, because it can be significant, the bandwidth that camera uses. And you want to make sure that your infrastructure can support it, both in terms of the USB infrastructure and the network infrastructure. Again, it's a design discussion always. And we do have resources here at Crestron to help you with that. So when we look at how the application handles cameras, in the Teams room, it's a single camera for audience view. and a second camera for content use. Now, from a tech support perspective, when you're setting up Teams, you want to make sure you go in and select the correct cameras for audience and content. Sometimes Teams wants to use your audience camera for content by default, and then when you're in a call, you don't see the audience because Teams has used your audience camera for content, and you need to go into settings and change that. In Zoom rooms, a single active camera for audience view, and you have the ability to switch between cameras. In terms of camera control, in Teams rooms, PTZ is not available in the native application, but can be accessed through a page flip, either with the reserved joins, which we talked about earlier, or total custom programming there. And PTZ actually is available natively in the Zoom Rooms application. So with that being said, we're going to move on to some common design examples. But first, another poll.
Before you go to Eric, before you go to the poll really quick,
Yes,
I think we're getting, I mean, number one, appreciate all the comments in both the chat and the Q&A. Love the fact that people are taking pictures of me and with my mouth open and putting on social media. It's been a consistent theme for Masters this year, so I appreciate that, guys. Thanks for looking out for me. Really quick, let's go back just a minute because there are so many questions coming in specifically regarding camera options and number of cameras. So stop right here for a second. On the Microsoft standpoint, you have a single audience camera today. There are no options within the application to be able to switch to a different audience camera. The secondary camera inclusion is for content, which is their feature that allows you to digitize a whiteboard and bring that content into the meeting. They have discussed bringing other cameras in, but if you're in a Teams environment and you need more than one camera today, your solution is to have those cameras in a non-USB format, switch externally using whatever video switching capability you have, and then bring them into the converter. So that way there's a single feed coming in and you're changing externally on the rest of the system. The other thing that's come up with the Microsoft solutions is within the setup of the device, there is a specific drop-down option to select the content camera. That is only for 3 specific approved cameras. There's some confusion between a content camera and an audience camera in terms of gating or allowed use. If you are not using the camera, the content camera function, make sure that that drop-down field in settings is set to none because you don't need it to be there. Flipping to the Zoom side, in a Zoom environment, you can see there on the slide that we have the ability, there's a button that says switch camera. And if you have one camera, that button won't appear. If you have 2 cameras, the button is a toggle and it will rotate back and forth between the 2 USB connected cameras that you have. When you move beyond 2, 3 or more, you'll see what you see on the screen, which is a list. And that way, inline in the application, you're able to select the various cameras. If you have 2 of the same camera, in the setup, you have the ability to change the name, enumerate specifically which camera is which. So you do have the ability to change that if you hook up a bunch of Hudley Go's or IQs or things like that. You can name them differently so the pop-up shows differently. You don't have to be confused about which one is which. But the one thing that has become somewhat challenging in the designs is the idea of switching USB externally, using an external USB switcher to feed your cameras. We don't recommend it. And it's back to that certification question. There's no guarantee that that device in the middle will hand off correctly between the unit. And so that is the case where we recommend you stay away from that. There are currently no products that are certified to handle external camera USB switching on the solutions today. So if you're going to do multiple cameras in that format, it needs to be upstream so that your compute only sees the single connection coming in at that point. And that's really the bulk of our questions today have primarily come around multiple cameras and things like that. So just some context there, Eric. Thanks.
Outstanding, Jason. Thank you for that info and background. It's huge. All right. So before we move on to some common design examples, I think we have a final poll. This is our last poll.
We do, Eric, and it actually goes to many of the questions that Jason was just discussing. Was, can PTZ cameras be controlled without the addition of a control system? So there's a lot of those in here. There's some additional questions about, can I run it through a USB hub and then into the input? I've got it working today. Is it supported? Will it not be supported? So I think once the poll is ended, I think we can spend a little bit more time on the questions
Okay.
as it relates to cameras.
Sounds good.
Okay. All right. So we'll let this run for a little bit. So there's a lot of stuff, whole section here on cameras and all that fun stuff, along with PTZ camera control, etc. And we'll have to spend some time a little bit later, maybe with Dante as well, because that has come up quite a bit.
All right, as you can see the poll progressing here. And again, I think the vast majority of the class is on the right track here.
Right. All right. So why don't we go ahead and wrap up the poll? Okay. We'll stop the polling now.
All right.
We're going to go ahead and share the results. And then let's talk about this a little bit more, gentlemen. Types of cameras, how it works. And I think we just got to reiterate it because there's still a lot of questions coming in.
All right, so in terms of reserve join control on the team side of that camera, it needs to have that particular support, UVC, and then the PTZ should function on that USB camera. That is the requirement for the reserve join PTZ support. Of course, if you're using custom programming, you know, you're going to do it in terms of what your program requires. So that's how it would work. Are there specific kinds of questions that we can address as a group on the cameras? And certainly we will have a cool down session after the main presentation where we can dig a little deeper and take a little bit of a deeper dive into some of these questions.
Yeah. And Eric, I think the other thing too that we want to delineate is also on the, it really comes down to application support on the cameras in terms of what they have. There are a number of ways you can do it. And the thing I want to get back to is, see, there's a difference between I have good success with the device and it being certified. Because at that point, you're effectively taking the risk yourself if that's the approach you want to go through. If you're familiar with some of the other Crestron solutions, it's just one of those places where we can't assist further or can't pursue further if we have an exception like that, and nor will the platform solutions. They have to put a fence around what they can and can't support. So someone else made the comment earlier, I think Rich, you brought it up, there is always the possibility, it's not a fear factor, but there's always a possibility that something may change, and if a device is not approved, the platform manufacturer is not looking to make accommodations for devices that it doesn't know anything about. So you could have some impact. We do have tech support cases in the queue for customers with degraded experience when they are using non-certified devices. And that if there was one that's probably the trickiest, it's the idea of USB outboard switching, because that device presents itself and the Microsoft Teams Room application of the Zoom Room has that USB knowledge. We know that in the exchange, it is providing manufacturer detail, things like that. If it comes up against the cloud and it's not on the whitelist, there's no way to guarantee a result. So really, it's not about what do you like, you know, do you like this brand, do you like that brand? I fully appreciate that end of the conversation. What tools do you like? How do you like to build your solutions? That's relevant in that component of design, but the relevance doesn't exist with the platform solutions. Certification is the only key that you have there to guarantee that you're providing your customer a solution that will operate in that case. So like I said, it's not, I like this DSP, I like this DSP, nothing to do with that in this conversation. It's all about what is on the certified list. And if you go with something non-certified, you're then taking that risk on behalf of yourself and your customer as to whether or not you or the platform or the manufacturer can support your solution. So just keep it in mind for context as you think about all the things that happen outside certification. There are certain rules that absolutely must be followed. There's some that you can bend a little bit, and there's some that, you know, in effect, they can be broken and they're done in a different way. Just keep that in mind as you approach the platforms. It's the context you have to have when you're thinking about your designs.
That's great information, Jason. And you used a word there when you talk about certified solutions that's, I think, a really key word to focus in on, and that is risk. One of the purposes of this certification process is to reduce the risk. And so, that's a big part of why you want to, pursue when necessary those certified solutions. So you're not taking unnecessary risks. That's huge. All right, so we'll move on to some common design examples.
All right, one more, Eric. Rich had a question there. Dante, Rich needed to cover Dante for a couple minutes.
Yeah, people wanted to understand, can I integrate Dante mics with these systems? If so, how do I do that? That's really their questions, is can I use Dante microphones in conjunction with these custom design systems?
Typically, that's going to be done with a certified DSP, feeding Dante into the certified DSP, and then to the UC engine. Jason and Joachim, am I on the right track there?
You are 100% correct in the Teams environment. In the Teams environment, the Teams application does not support Dante functions today. We know it's an item that's been getting a lot of interest. Many of you in the chat are putting up the conversations about Microsoft User Voice, which is a location where you can provide suggestions. There's a lot of activity there, but today, the here and now, there are no options for direct Dante integration to the Teams platform. If you go to that certified list later, you'll see a description of a solution. You'll see Shure microphone with Shure DSP, and that's a certified solution. You'll go to the Bose, and the Bose indicates the Sennheiser mic, and then Biamp obviously has their solution as well. It'll actually lay some of those out there in terms of how do you go from Dante over to the DSP and then into the device. Zoom is a little bit different. Zoom does have the ability. So for myself, in my test bed in my lab, I have a Zoom solution, and I actually leverage a Dante microphone, and there's a direct integration on the Zoom side. So it is different between platforms in the team standpoint. You can have the presence of Dante in your overall solution, but it doesn't touch the application directly. And on the Zoom side, it is direct. The other item that comes up a lot in the chat that I see is conversations about software-based DSPs. Crestron's well aware of some of the recent entries into the market, but at this time, based on the certification routine, there are no accommodations for those solutions as of yet. I think that it's a very attractive solution if you could get to the point where the microphone could talk to the application, the DSP application, and then in turn talk to the Teams Room application, but it's not there today. There's a couple fundamental things to look at that the DSP software applications require that are actually in contrast to the Microsoft Teams Room's management of the device regarding Windows updates and other things. And there's a bit of a clash between the two, and that is the reason why that effort isn't approved at this time. So we're very aware of it. It's very exciting for the community because we know there's a lot of cases in which maybe you don't need the hardware DSP, but you need a little bit better microphone, or you're thinking about a retrofit where the customer already has some type of array-based microphone in use and they want to stay with it. So we fully understand, but the process has to take its course a little bit with the platform manufacturers before we can say, you can install this DSP software on the solution. So right. Aware of it, it's happening in the background right now is the best way I could put it.
So these platforms are still maturing, definitely. And, listening to Jason talk, I was just having the thought that it's literally a full-time job just keeping up with the changes coming down on these various platforms. And I just wonder how much sleep Jason is getting these days, because it's just so much going on with the technology, of course, with everything going on generally in the world. There's so much more attention on these platforms. The developments are probably going to come even faster now. Speculating there, but it's, I think, a pretty accurate one. All right, so if there's no more discussion around Dante, we'll move on to some common design examples. The first use case will be a retrofit. Now, this is going to be more of a discussion amongst us in terms of these use case examples. When you are retrofitting, in other words, bringing flex into an existing system, you have some factors to consider. Is there legacy equipment? Are you going to preserve that equipment or change it out? Is there functionality in that legacy system that you will also preserve? And Again, in terms of the interface itself, typically the touch screen, probably there'll be some changes needed there because of the requirements of the platforms, Teams or Zoom, and we'll have to go to a page flip control scenario if that is the scope of the project. Gentlemen, would you like to chime in on this?
Yeah, I think there are lots of different options in retrofit environments. I think it really comes back to what we've been talking about in many of the other courses we've run, which is really understanding the needs of the customer and having many different solutions available to you. What am I coming in to replace? I mean, this is an interesting picture right here. It's a completely flexible, small little room. Don't know where, could be anywhere, probably a catering hall of some kind. Okay, what is it that the system has? What is the functionality the customer is looking for? And truthfully, before even looking at those aspects, the real question becomes, what are the challenges we are here to overcome? What is it we need to accomplish to have a customer who gets the best possible experience? Based on that information, you begin to ask, okay, what do you have in the room today? What is the overall need that we need to accomplish and resolve for them? And then what do you want to preserve? What do they like? What don't they like? Okay. And then from there, you begin to look at programming concepts, custom interface versus native interface. What is their expectation? Who are their users, right? I mean, is there a standard for the company? Is there a standard that they need to consider? When you are going, and I know there's lots of questions in here as well, I would like to be able to not use the Zoom interface and create my own interface, or not use the team interface and use my own interface. Unfortunately, that's not an option with either of those platforms. Those platforms have the user experience that they want. By using the C-Series application, you have the capability of adding in custom controls, and we have themes available in Crestron Studio, for example, for Teams, to allow you to mimic a consistent look, as the case may be, to match the layout when flipping into controls of the rooms. But the Teams and the Zoom UIs are the primary interfaces for these locations. So I think that's an important thing to consider, to understand and appreciate during a retrofit environment. Joachim or Jason, would you care to comment or add to that?
Rich, you said Crestron Studio in a master's class, and I almost fell out of my chair.
Well, that's where the theme can be found.
I understand.
Eric. So, the themes are still there. They're available. People can use those to create a matching theme and then go from that. But I'm going to turn it over to Jason and or Joachim to comment about when you integrate processors or maybe other conversation points.
I'm going to let Joachim go first on this one because I think it's important, especially while that we represent a little bit of our international audience, because I'm sure some of the dynamics are different. So Joachim, you want to jump in?
Yeah. So in general, what we see if our control systems are added to the room is mostly if there are other room functionality like the blind shades going up and down. So like the system that's already within the building itself, and they actually want to have a way to have like the fully integrated system on one panel, actually on the table itself, to make it easier for the users. So a lot of things for retrofit is indeed they have the capability that they have like a Crestron system in there. They have like a separate video conferencing system, and then they move full to Teams actually. So they indeed use then the C-Kit to actually upgrade the environment and the system they're in. And it usually is pretty straightforward, as they already have created a project for this. So it's easy to actually apply and add this within the room functionality without with minimum effort, let us say. It's more of a challenge with the IT department from time to time than actually installing the hardware and getting that site to work. That's what I've seen in the EMEA region in general.
I think the only other thing I might add to that would be a conversation about determining if you need to carry technology forward
Mhm.
into the new room, this is a very, if there was a way to describe disruption being a positive item, the
Mm.
inclusion of a native system does give you the ability to reset your users a little bit and train them on a new experience. And so one of the challenges I'll deal with as I'm helping a customer with design is that many times there's some preconceived notions about technology in the room that they believe they need to carry forward in the new design. And
Hmm.
it's important behaviorally to look at that system and figure out whether or not you need to carry it forward in this new design, because maybe the platform accomplishes it for you. Maybe it was a legacy function that created significant number of tickets for the room. It was difficult to support. So more than anything else, I look at this very high level that when you're thinking about a retrofit, re-examine the behaviors and determine if you want to carry those behaviors forward, or if you can leverage the platform change to move from some type of system, whether it was a Crestron system or something else, into a native room experience. Figure out what you want to carry with you. What is the baggage that you want to bring forward? What features do you want to bring forward? And really examine it that way, and focus less on the tech and more about, you know, what your modified experience is going to be.
In my experience, Jason, you typically see a lot of these kinds of legacy issues in the educational market, typically more so than the business area. In education, very often you need that legacy device support. There are still professors that bring in VHS tapes, right? That sort of thing. A lot of the folks in universities still have VGA on their computers that need supporting. So, you know, an example there. And I love the phrase you use, behavior first, technology second. I think that's just a huge sort of catchy phrase to remember really the priority of what needs to happen here. All right, so we'll move on, and we will move on to our second use case, a divisible space. Now, this can be very much a challenge because, you know, do you need a single flex system? Do you need multiple systems? Are there AEC scenarios here based on, you know, audio factors of the divisible space? If you have multiple panels controlling it, will certain panels get locked out when the room combines versus when it's separate? And so there are numerous design and implementation issues in a divisible space. So let's chat about that, gentlemen. Again, it's one of these situations where we will support you through the process of configuring the design for this. And in my experience, and I've been at Crestron 14 years. The first 10 years, I was frontline tech support on the phones. I did somewhere in the neighborhood of 30,000 tech support cases. And there are numerous concerns when you set up a divisible space like this. And no two jobs like this are exactly the same. And so having sat in tech support, I can say that especially in a divisible space scenario, design is so important.
So I think that divisible spaces add such a level of complexity to a system. Having done tons of these in the past, acoustics come into consideration, as you just mentioned, okay? Changes in acoustics come into consideration depending on the room combined modes. Mic placement becomes a factor. Speaker placement becomes a factor. Overall use and flexibility becomes a factor. Display location becomes a factor. All of these scenarios come into play, and then you have to consider, do I need to have, for example, let's say go with something as relatively simple as a three-way divisible. Do I need to have three separate systems, one for each room? And then when I go into various combined modes, which system takes priority? Or am I sharing a system across those? Each of those has different complexity of design that needs to be considered. Which microphones are active, which speakers are active. The programming factors become exponential the more divisible spaces you add. For those of you who have done divisible spaces, I'm sure you have had the challenge of, how do I lay it out on my user interface? How do I get everything programmatically to work correctly. And then from those of you who tune the rooms, okay, getting all the microphones to pick up in the various scenarios, making it sound good, dealing with different HVAC environments that come into fact that now begin to impact your AEC reference changes. How does that all come into the design consideration for what you do? None of that is easy to discuss and really address in the 3 minutes, 4 minutes we have here. It really becomes a complete design conversation with our technical sales teams, either in the US, in Europe, or in Asia Pacific. We have locations in all regions that can help you with that. And they're actually they're glad to help you with review your design, help you create a design, because there's quite a lot to configure. There's no quick and easy way to do a divisible room. There are standards you follow. There are parameters you need to include. A lot of that is found in the VIXA site, but it is something that is difficult to design for and take into consideration. Joachim, I mean, you've come across these in flex systems that you've supported in the past. What are some of the challenges that you've had to overcome in supporting these divisible rooms when implementing a flex or a unified communication solution?
So yeah, in general, the first thing indeed was like the audio was a massive assignment, especially for the cases I've been involved in regarding getting the acoustics correctly. And then not to speak of like the user itself, right? So the end user and the people that actually are using the room. These are actually the most things that you need to inform, speak with them and check what they actually want. So to see that you put a perspective in there, like, is it possible, yes or no? So like the conversation in advance is actually the most important thing that that you could have in such a bigger project, especially with the visible rooms. As to determine what actually the requirements are for each room, what they actually are expecting from the functionality if rooms are combined. And once that's actually straightened out and on paper and have a guideline that actually improves the workflow and stability. I've seen that in some cases it was a little bit more struggle to get the functionality up and running. People expected different situations or different behaviors from the system and so on. And it's more like informing the customer and yourself as well, and get indeed our sales support teams and tech support, give them a call to help you in advance, to help you guide you to the correct solution for that specific customer actually. So we're there. So abuse us, I would say.
That's excellent, Joachim, and thank you for that. I was having a thought, and I was kind of having a memory flash when we talk about these divisible rooms. Now, way back when, before I worked for Crestron, I worked on Wall Street, I worked at a bank, and they had a divisible room. And they used it for conferencing, but the primary use of the room was the executive dining room. And when it was the executive dining room, they did not want to see one wire, one touch panel, any technology at all. They wanted it just to be a dining room. And so that's another consideration here, potentially depending on where these systems are put in terms of a divisible space, the customer might want the equipment essentially removed from the space when not in use. So connectivity is going to be a factor here as well.
Eric, the only thing I was going to add there, just briefly, that we look at is really that conversation in terms of how many systems do you want to use. In some cases, the easier approach is when you're in an ABC environment to put the device in A, and then change your AC reference as you open and close walls. As you introduce more systems into the spaces, and you want to make every room divisible or enable every room with UC functionality. The scenario you have to get to is, are you going to try to bond those systems together using other types of technology, video switching, audio switching, whatever it is? Or are you going to deal with the point where you're going to bring all of the systems into the same meeting and you're going to turn off your microphones accordingly, feeding the systems? And that's really one of the two different approaches. I'd say this is a very hot topic. I get 2 or 3 questions a week about divisible design, but I think you have to figure out those factors, and then from there, then you can roll into it and determine what's best. But I think about, do you need the individual spaces, or is it a case where you can dedicate one room to UC, and link others in an overflow format, or is it an
Right.
always on, always needed scenario? And you can play some tricks with Exchange and, invite all the rooms at once and do things like that if you need to. But it's a conversation, really. These are conversations to explore as you approach some of these high-level custom spaces.
And again, as you said, there's no one-size-fits-all solution here. It's a conversation that needs to be held both with the customer and designers. Outstanding. We're going to move on to use case 3, core Crestron. So if you already have a Crestron core, how does the UC fit into this scenario? Gentlemen, get us started.
I'm going to take this one to start, Eric, for some context. So the idea behind a core Crestron solution is, as you're aware, within the certification space, once a device is certified, you can craft your own custom solution. And so what we've seen a heavy interest in is to take the Crestron C series, the custom series, and either the 160 or the 140 solution, since we now have both models, and to be able to wrap other certified technology around it. And so from our standpoint, it's the reason that, earlier this year at ISE, we made an announcement that we have a new partnership with Logitech on their side, because they're obviously not only one of the players in the overall Microsoft Teams room space, but they're also a partner at a peripheral standpoint with us. And so the idea was to put a higher level partnership together. And so behind the scenes, we're going to be working with our solutions, Crestron XIO, and then the inclusion of the Logitech products to provide visibility. And so even though you have the interop conversation happening around certified devices, because we know that our customers have these types of needs, that maybe I really like the Rally camera, for instance, and I like the management programming component that comes along with the Crestron. We're in effect endorsing that concept and providing the end customer additional value by saying, look, here are the reference designs. Here's how you would link these systems together. Our tech sales team, as you guys all mentioned before, has a number of resources for this. But the idea behind it is we're wanting to create a better user experience for the end customer by allowing some variation in design. But for us specifically, putting our support behind a partnership with Logitech is where we're heading. So we'll see more of this, but the main thing is we can provide additional value by linking Logitech solution into our solution and creating that better experience for the customer by giving them the best of everything, or specifically responding to whatever their needs are.
I'm excited about that partnership as well. I mean, I think all of us have heard of Logitech. They're pretty ubiquitous. They're everywhere. And to partner up with them, I think is going to be huge for both sides of that partnership. Rich or Joachim, would you like to add anything to that?
I think one of the nice things and one of the most challenging things about Crestron is we give you great flexibility. And one of the things that comes up with the flex line is that we are saying, okay, you have great flexibility, but certified products are what you need to use. And I know that a lot of people look at it going, well, why do I have to use a certified product? Because if Microsoft makes a change and they break it, guess what? They're responsible and we're responsible. If you put a non-certified product in and you have a problem, we'll do our best to help you, but we can't guarantee we can solve the problem because it's not an approved device. This is a change in the model, and it's a big change for a lot of people to wrap their heads around how important using certified products are for successful integration. As design engineers, it's critical to choose systems that are going to make you a happy customer and that are going to give you a profitable installation that is easy to support. When you choose a product because you like it and it's a good product, but it's not certified, you open yourself up to a potential challenge that gives a poor customer experience. So I think it really is all about taking a little bit of time up front, looking at the certified list of devices, and I've been sending that in the question and answers repeatedly and repeatedly. We'll make sure we add that into the deck before it goes out, guys, to make sure they have that link as well. But we want to make sure that you take the time to review those devices. They are available in different regions around the world, and use those as part of your design. because it becomes critical to your success, both for your end client and for you, to choose the right product for the installation that meets the customer's needs and their solutions. And we can better support you with certified devices. Joachim, do you want to add to that?
Nothing actually more to say, as indeed it makes our life easier as well. If we're supporting you and everything are certified, and there are some issues, it makes it easier for us to push back as well to the different departments or manufacturers to come up with a solution as quickly as possible indeed for things, or even makes it easier for us to set up, duplicate, and yeah, assist you guys as quickly as possible to get all of the struggles maybe away from the installation at that point. But that's it. Is it indeed?
Well said, Joachim. And again, the certified solutions reduce the risk. And so it's certainly something you want to explore for your customer. So we're going to move into the home stretch of the class now, and we're going to look at some resources for you. These are online resources on our website. You see the links here. This presentation will be posted to Online Help Answer ID 2015-2015. And so you can find these links in the presentation when it goes up. You can always go into our website for the kind of links and use search, and typically you will find what you're looking for. In terms of industry resources, here are the key links for both platforms, both Microsoft Teams and Zoom Rooms. Again, this presentation will be posted, and so you can download it and use these links. And with all of that being said, this is the end of the presentation part of the class. We thank you for attending. Our next session will be Designing with Modern Programming Tools on May 13th at 11 Eastern Daylight Time, United States.
It's actually May 14th, which is tomorrow, but that's okay. No problem. So what we're going to do now, in a moment, we're going to end the recording. We are going to go ahead and try and answer a few of the questions that came in here as well, so that we can discuss those further. I did see quite a lot of questions that I think we should discuss with the groups, but this is where we're going to wrap up the actual presentation, and we will go ahead and end the recording now. So thank you all for joining, and we will hang around for an after chat.